All right. Hi, Melissa, and
Hi.
thanks for coming and doing this Zoom pitch. Going to be great to see what you're up to, and I'll try to share as much feedback as possible.
Amazing. Thank you so much for the invite. So if we're ready to go, shall I start with an intro? Amazing.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, so it's lovely to be here. I'm Melissa McBride. I am the founder of Sophia Technologies, and I'm really excited to share with you today how we're using gaming and play to learn to build the future of education. So when we think about education, the open secret is that our schools are still operating on a model that was designed in 1763. Innovation has been the driver of the human story for the last 150 years. But the story of innovation in education, well, we've definitely introduced new technologies, but basically all we have is a different whiteboard. Our children still sit in rows, they still listen to the teacher at the front of the class, and we still test them on knowledge that's been imparted in them in our classrooms around the globe. We can no longer afford to prepare children for life in 1763 or 2019 for that matter. It's time for education, and we believe that it begins today because we either disrupt or we're going to be disrupted. So to give you a size of the magnitude of the problem, we have a global teacher crisis. 69 million new teachers are going to be needed by 2030. There are already a shortage of 19 million teachers in the MENA region alone. And our teacher turnover rates move from between 12.9% growing to 27%, depending on where you are in the world. Our students, who are our most important stakeholders, have a lack of engagement. 40% of students are not interested in education. And there's a mental well-being crisis brewing amongst our young people. 80% increase in anxiety, 72% increase in depression. Technology has been introduced, but 60% of it still to this day is on analog content and traditional teaching methods. 617 million children do not reach minimum proficiency anyways in reading and math globally. So the world has been imagining a new model of education for years, but at Sophia, we're actually building it, and it has the power to educate all, anytime, anywhere, everyone. But just how big can this market be? If we just focus on fast-moving regions who are focused on innovation and progressive approaches to education, looking at the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the UAE, we have the opportunity to reach in our initial phases of 105 million in terms of our serviceable market. When we think about how this extends globally, if we get it right, we're talking about 1.5 billion students on the planet enrolled in K-12 education. Increased spending, growing demand, and tech innovations are fueling an incredible sleeping giant, and that giant is education. So we're building the Netflix of K-12 metaverse education. A digital campus where every child has access to incredible game for learn technology powered by the latest VR and AI technologies, so that we can predict what students need to learn, their individual flight paths, and design an experience which supports these students in the best way of learning. It's a mandate that allows for community, for connection, for collaboration, for enjoyment, and we tap into the way that the brain was designed to learn experientially. We're incredibly excited to be thinking about our model of education in terms of also activating two realms, learning realm and creators realm. We recognize that some of the best content creators are educators themselves. And in terms of building a platform, we wish to open the door where students and educators can be part of our creators community, just like YouTube has done for Web 2. With Athena, our platform for metaverse education, we aspire that Athena becomes the way that educators can be part of building Web 3. But why now? Number one, we're designing with educators for students because we believe that technology drives the future of education, but it doesn't replace the teacher. Most importantly, this is built for next gen students. We have significant tailwinds for change driving us. The rise of online and hybrid learning models, the decentralization of learning, tech advancements in a digital world. Next month, we know that Apple will release their XR mixed reality headset, and that's going to change the way that we live, the way we work, the way we socialize, and the way that we learn. Most of all, this is about a workforce of young people that is going to be demanding future skills for life in 2030. These are the 29 million K-12 students that use Minecraft, 18.5 million daily Roblox users. They are deciding, they are the future, and this is who it's designed for. So in the next 18 to 24 months, we aspire to make sure that we define the winning strategy and build our moat. This is all about attracting the right talent so that we can collaborate with the world's leading educators, technologists, and venture builders to make the right hires to build the right team that can bring this platform to life. We know that in addressing education, our platform needs to be safe, it needs to be accessible, and we need to be thinking about the technologies of the future. This is about our desire to be an edtech company that builds the first metaverse education platform designed specifically for play to learn to reach 100 million ARR. Our team shares 79 years of educational headship and senior leadership experience. We've opened 5 British outstanding schools around the globe, and we're already leaders in online education. Our team has deep knowledge across education, technology, and finance. We're founders of the Metaverse Education Council. We work with departments for education around the globe. We've partnered with some of the leading physical bricks and mortar school groups, including Cognita Schools. We're partners with Pico. We were winners of the Somnium Space Creators Fund. And most recently, Nick Clegg, the president of Meta Global Affairs, invited us to his roundtable to talk about the awesome potential for learning in this space. This isn't science and it's not science fiction. It's happening right now, and we want you to be part of it. Thank you for listening to our pitch. Happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Melissa. Did you, by the way, go through like a pitching training at some point? Like, how did you
no, is that a good question or a bad question?
Well, I'm just trying to figure out where the format came from.
So one, I've always had the affinity to speak passionately from the heart. So hopefully that was something that you sensed coming through. In terms of the pitch, we try to shape a story. And one of the benefits that we've had most recently is working with a significant metaverse pitch competition and working with some of their venture coaches in terms of shaping the story that a technology-focused group would be interested in hearing.
Okay, I got it. So it's basically coming from their assistance.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's. I don't think, you know, if it's like too rigid or it's flowing or it's story-wise. I think it really depends what you have to say versus like how you deliver. I'm not like a big deliver proponent. Like I've seen all sorts of delivery, and often like the best deliverers aren't the best business people, like startup builders or vice versa, even though like there might be correlation, but it doesn't always be like, it's not like binary, that if you can't deliver, you can't build.
And one of the things I've noticed, and I'd love your thoughts, is it really depends on who you're speaking to, because some are experts in the field and really understand the vertical that you're working in, and some are much more broader. So it's trying to identify, I think, that audience and what will resonate as best as you can.
Yes, a commonality that all investors should have is like a spectrum of, they've seen 0 pitches of startups versus thousands, and they're in between somewhere there. Like if you haven't ever like watched the startup pitch, then everything is new here. Everything is sort of like, you don't really know how to react. But if you see hundreds of startup pitches every month as a career, as an investor for years, then you're gonna go into like picking details like I'm trying to right now, and just looking at what you're trying to message here. What does it tell you? What does it tell me about you, and how you're gonna go about it, build this thing.
I think one thing I learned also, which again, sorry to ask a question back to you, is founders often, and it's certainly feedback that we've had, because we're so closely tied that we can become dangerously close to describing lots and lots of technical aspects of it, when actually in terms of the pitch, it's much more about, I think, the bigger picture rather than to get down into the weeds.
Yeah.
So that's something that we've had
That's
to like
so
uncoach me out of, because I live and breathe it all the time. And it's kind of like, wow, well, where are you getting at, right? So I don't know if you've got feedback on that, but would love to hear it, because I think I'm not the only founder that's guilty of that.
Yeah, I think it went really well, but it was very much a practice versus like a dynamic. I don't know, how do I say it? Like it was a scripted pitch. That's how it felt a bit.
Yeah.
Versus like a very dynamic one. But I think over time, as you get more putting the pitch in front of people and going through it, like you can leave the script behind and go more like where you feel the good things and the impressive things and the things that really matter for you are in this pitch. Like just thinking about some of the slides here, if you can go back to the very beginning, and we can take a look at the slides on their own.
Yeah.
So I think this is great how you're starting off with like talking about like how there's no innovation in education. I think something you could inject here, which was sort of my curiosity, was like what happened during the pandemic as we got into this mass experiment where you didn't have this kind of setup where kids are in the room, 20 kids in the room and the teacher in the front. Like that was impossible to do. What were the biggest takeaways from that experiment that went on for a few years?
Yeah.
And also like maybe maybe you should do a deep dive and then think about like what comes into the deck out of that. Like in a deep dive, I would look at, okay, what worked, what didn't work, what did we pick from during the pandemic that matters today, now that all the lockdowns have ended? More like nuanced details that you can pull out, insights, trends, whatever. And then like when you have that, then figure out what makes sense for you guys in a pitch, that it doesn't become too overwhelming. There's a few slides here where it felt a bit overwhelming with like so many data points like being shared in one slide, where it's like, okay, maybe that would be the next. Or do you want to comment on the pandemic a bit before we go?
No, I think, something like it is a spark, right? It has been a spark that's become a catalyst, although education has gone backwards again since lockdown ended. But I think what it did teach us is there is huge power and potential here, but we have to do it correctly, right? 25 kids on Zoom doesn't work, but a digital mandate does, because that's how these kids are wired, right? We have like iPad baby generation. That's it. And I think points are really, really important, because it begins to shape, I think, in the mind, for those interested in the space, just why this has such great potential, right? Because we know this is where children are at. This is where they learn most naturally, and how we can build those processes through, and I use online loosely, online VR gaming, web-based, 6 degrees of freedom, whichever. And I think that's a really, really good takeaway, is to unpack it, because it was a catalyst. It's become stagnated, but it will push ahead. It will push ahead again, I think, as content designed by educators, for this market comes online, rather than just adopting, which is what we had to do in an emergency situation.
But having that slide here about what did we learn about education during the pandemic?
Yeah.
If you have that slide and you really work, like put a lot of effort into that slide, I think it can really deliver in a way which makes you seem very confident about you knowing what
Yeah.
business you're in. And the investor will appreciate that very much. I feel like, at least I would be like very curious to know, like, what are the insights there, and
Yeah.
where are you on top of things?
Yeah, I think because where it didn't work was because when you move into the digital, like the focus on personalization and immersion, right, are the two most critical factors,
Yeah.
because otherwise you're just not getting the right reactions per minute. And I think that's where and why when kids play games, right, they become addicted to it because of the endorphins that get released. And it's that same mandate. So pulling forth a slide that unpacks some of that, I think you're right. Really, really going to resonate with, this is a great vertical to be in and one that has immense potential.
Yeah, even like thinking about this slide that you have here right now, where you're talking a lot about the things that you were talking about now that isn't working. Like you could even highlight through the pandemic how like the things weren't working before, and now we're going back to the ones that didn't work because it's like convenient, because we have this system that's been running for a few hundred years.
You have institutes that have to be have kids in them. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but then I'm looking at this SDG4 at the bottom of the slide, and I'm like, I don't know what that is. Like, but yeah, kind of, this is an overwhelming slide with a lot of data points where I'm always encouraging founders to think about appendix slides where you can do a more deep dive into very specific kind of circumstantial data about the current market, and rather like pull 1 or 2, like 2 to 3 points about the current market, which is easy for somebody to view when it's being presented at the same time, because that's the dilemma here. You're talking, and I'm looking at a slide that has hundreds of words, so it's kind of hard to pay attention to both. I'm not doing either well. I'm not reading the slide well. I'm not reading what you're saying well. So if you can like go to just a few 1, 2 to 3 data points that are easy to just glance, the impact is much better. And then you can put everything into the appendix, because any investor wants to anyways have some offline time with your material. That's usually where everything starts. So you can have the appendix. If you get them interested with the core deck, they will go for the appendix.
Yeah, it's creating a sense of FOMO. But I think to this point, the most important stakeholder are students, right? And I think to your point about the previous slide, looking at like, what did we learn in the pandemic and highlighting it, again, this lack of engagement, which is actually what our platform is designed to solve, is it's about capturing the attention, the interest of children, keeping them in the learning loop, because they're learning through play and they're learning through experience. And I think that's a really good point that we could tease out as one of the key metrics here. The teacher story is obviously very important as well, but if you have really engaged students, and enjoyable classrooms, we won't lose as many. So I think connecting these two things, but lightening up the data points, I think you're right, or absolutely make a lot of sense.
Yeah. Let's go to well, here you go into the VR. I wanted to ask you about like how did you pick VR? What was the sort of inception there?
So we picked VR because I suppose it's the experience that we have with our school that we run, which is fully digital. So our kids have no physical campus. So we have a global classroom. And when that happens, you have to question, well, how do you go on field trips as a shared experience? How do you teach some subjects that you need a physical environment? So that then opened up the power and potential of our development team to begin to build out for a VR focused mandate, which is, persistent and it's connected and it's collaborative. it can be experiential, it can be live lessons taught, you know, and you could have the best teachers in the world that don't have to be standing in your physical geographical location. We also believe, you know, and I alluded to it, that although VR has been around a long time, there's been a lack of content designed for educational mandates, designed for teaching in an immersive way, collaboratively. They're often single or VR hands. And so for us, it's a vertical that we think is got a lot of potential, and we're watching very closely, as we said, about what Apple does, because we think that's going to be a driver for much more mass adoption in terms of when they enter the market. And kids are native. I don't know if you've ever seen what happens when kids versus adult puts on the headset, right? They are just spatially native learners already. And I think that is who is driving. Like that is actually who our client base is. We're okay that it's early because we're still building and learning, but that's why 6 degrees of freedom is the focus that we work on.
Yeah. Well, 2 things come to mind what you're saying now. So first off, from the deck and the pitch, I didn't realize that you already have a classroom going. So that's like something you should mention. Like in at least like highlight in the text and also in how you talk about it. Like maybe a slide where you don't actually need to do this kind of like slide that you have here right now, which is more like this aspirational slide, but rather like informative, impactful slide where you say what you've done already with users, like end users.
Yeah, they're kind of you know, it's like our inbuilt playground, you know, where we're able to work with real kids and real parents and real teachers to almost like beta tests or alpha tests inside our closed loop, right? And measuring progress as we begin to push out towards, you know, wider markets. And we see incredible results internally, right? Because and also for investors, like, listen, it's revenue generating. The online school part already is. No, it's not strictly gaming, but it is already laying the foundations for how we say who is our market and what do they think about this.
Yeah, like currently the deck doesn't really tell me anything besides, oh yeah, there's maybe something coming in the future.
Okay.
That's how I feel myself when and again, like 2 to 3 data points only. Like you want to be cautious about, like, again, like you can do the appendix slide that has a bunch of details. Who are the students? Where do they live? How much are they paying? How were they enrolled? What was the cohort, sort of like demographics, everything, like how you got them in, because that all matters, like what kind of marketing you did to get them in, like how easy it is to get more kids and a sort of like education going. But that's all in the appendix. You just want to show here that you already have a school going and the result, like one line of like, this is the result.
And I think it also shows, which you're probably going to come to, that, you know, it's interesting because with this new realm of how we can teach, right? It starts with B2C because they're early adopters, bizarrely. But then you move to schools, you know, again, that we're already working with, who want to then deliver this from the school level, and that then filters upwards into like the government level. But at the moment, all of this stuff is actually being like reverse engineered, and it's being adopted first by B2C markets, but it does extend upwards, which is fascinating because often the story's been the other way around, and perhaps that's why it's not worked. But I must just say, I love this idea of an appendix slide because it's not actually talked about that often for founders. And I think it makes so much sense, right?
It does.
Honestly, like if I take nothing else away, which I will, that appendix slide is like gold.
So this is like how I work and how most of my friends in VC and angel investors work. They want to see a deck to read it offline before they take a call, always. Like 99%, I think it's that way. Like some might say that, oh yeah, the impact will be lessened if you're not delivering it on a call. But there's so many people that the best investors out there are trying to reach on a daily basis, and it's impossible for them to take a call with each you know, founder to then see what they're up to. So like working on a core deck that's enticing and then putting a lot more details into the appendix is the way to go. So that's the right sort of story that you want to build up.
And I think you're right. If they're interested, they'll read it. If they're not, they just put it away, right? But there's no time lost, right? So yeah, no, honestly, that's a really, really great piece of advice for founders.
And on the VR side, what I would really like to see here is your thoughts about the challenges of adoption of VR. What immediately comes to my mind here is like when I was like going to university in the turn of the century, and I was like the school said that all the students will get a laptop, like need to get a laptop. It felt a bit like, oh yeah, this is very like expensive, and it's gonna be cool to have the laptop as a like computer science student. But it kind of, it's the same with the VR then. It's gonna be expensive. It's very lacking the word, kind of inclusionary as well, that you're or exclusive only to people who might afford a VR headset. So maybe like first talk about the adoption challenges out there. Apple's like VR initiatives are great for sure. The prices will definitely go down with the headsets eventually, and more people will have them. But it's good to highlight these challenges in the deck versus just saying that VR is the future.
Yeah.
And not going any deeper into that.
No, and I think listen, there's also, aesthetic. I don't mean aesthetics by the way it looks, but the way it feels, right? And like, I mean, that's a huge headset on that young boy. And that will obviously improve. But content is everything, you can rationalize and content and actually outputs. So how much more do kids learn in this space? We're starting to see those metrics being reported on. And then it's about the realignment of, listen, if you were a school that built $1 million science lab, how many kids are running through that? And actually, can you reallocate those funds to learning in different ways? And it's not a slow process. I think we're just at the very beginning of it.
Yeah.
But that's I think where the kind of moonshot lies, is understanding what's coming and what the challenges are and how you overcome it. So being able to unpack that. And I think, again, it loops back to one of the points before, which maybe is where the data point can go. When you have no teachers, this is what we're dealing with. You prepare to think differently, right? And funny enough, I think one of the areas we're going to see fastest adoption, we'll say, is in emerging markets where they don't have the bricks and mortar institutes to have to defend. So investing in VR in hubs, and accessing teachers around the globe because they can't get them there and they can't build. I think bizarrely, that's where we're going to see it start to take off.
Yeah, I guess there's going to be the question. So it's going to be more affordable to have everybody have a VR headset versus one teacher teaching 20 kids. That's the question.
Isn't that crazy?
But is it that way?
Yeah.
But like you need to answer that. Like why would it make sense to ship 20 VR headsets to kids versus like having one teacher teach 20 kids?
Yeah. And I think one thing we're aware of is ethically, obviously considering, but where does then AI come into this? Because I think with the shift that we've seen, but like AI with utility and not because it's hype, right? Whereas you essentially could have very decentralized model of learning because the best teachers in the world can teach and deliver, and AI can replay that to those who would never have access to those teachers before, if it's done in a safe and ethical way, I think, and with full proviso that this is an AI recording of a lesson, right? But again, it starts to lower the threshold for cost in terms of ongoing content once the initial VR headset is bought and we have access to a secure Wi-Fi and broadband, I think.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And even thinking about the countries where this is going to be like where they lower income, like say Africa, other regions of the world. Like if you have AI, that already is a big improvement on like all the large language models helping out. Maybe you can roll out a non-VR version for those people. So there's optionality there.
Yeah.
So I think you're gonna have some pushback on the VR side, but not on the AI side. I think the AI side is like a golden thing for you, sure.
Yeah. And
Like,
again, because we're just, we obviously have like metrics that run, but obviously, you need to be open to where the future is. Like 8 months ago, we probably wouldn't have been talking about AI in the same way, although we probably used it. But obviously the world has changed and continues to do so. So how can we respond to these new levels of accessibility and knowledge that's being driven forward? And how do we adopt what we're doing to make sure, as we say, we go back to that moat, right? Like if we're going to get pushed back on some areas, which we will, I agree, how do we create the moat that there's another option for the rest of the globe? That again, affordability is going to be a question mark.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But there's one more area that I want to cover here. It's not specifically on the slides, but I think you want to address it. The slide doesn't really talk about the venture backability of your project. You talk about the market. 105 billion was a number mentioned there. Yeah. So how big can this be? This doesn't really talk about like the business model, the spending patterns here, like who is spending on what is going on? Like, is this a similar business to Duolingo, which is probably the biggest sort of Web2 gamified education platform out there? So I would want you to really focus thinking about like how do you convince that this is a business where venture capital makes sense. That like just going into the simple thing of thinking about like what the VC will think is, okay, if we invest like 2 million into this company, can they raise another round in 12 to 18 months? What does things look like? What needs to happen in the next year so that there's a bigger round coming where the company sort of raises the A round or something?
So what would be the metrics? And it doesn't need to be necessarily on this business line that would convince you, I think, which is really important, because any founder watching this back and say, okay, that I can take that away and apply it to my own particular sector, particular solution.
I think it's showing progress and traction with users. So like you want to have in your head about like where do you think the business is in 12 months regarding adoption? The problem, like the VC will think is, okay, if we invest now, like will the next round of investments come from investors who need to pay a premium for what they're getting, like versus what we're paying now? When in 12 months things haven't progressed enough. So you want to think about like how do you message what will happen in the next 12 months to make sense that like a 3 to 4 times bigger valuation is justifiable in 12 months. And that's why valuations have come down so much now in 2023, is that like that math needs to start working again, where there is another round coming in a year or a year and a half. And if you were raising a 20 million valuation, you need to do a lot to reach like 50 to 60 million valuation in a year.
And I think specifically with my sector, the ed tech, right? Like we can think of, well, I don't know if I should mention them, but certain ed tech companies that because they've had disruption, their valuations have kind of fallen off the map because their defensibility has disappeared, right? And like that is obviously a concern to investors. It's a concern for the ed tech segment specifically because it's just not been disrupted before really at scale. And then how do we show those metrics? So, how many schools, how many students, how many products, how many, that traction story. I think you're right.
Yeah, and in a way, like you wanna come up with projections that you're very confident that you can hit.
Yeah.
Versus over promising.
Yeah.
Rather like under promise and over deliver.
Right.
Then the next round will be a lot easier. So rather, if you think about, oh yeah, we're gonna raise 2 million at 10 valuation, rather go for 1 million at 5 and see if you can do the same with 1 million by cutting off VR, for instance, like whatever it takes to hit kind of traction numbers which show that people are adopting. This is just a very like sort of highlighted example, but like that's what I think is one of the biggest things that don't really get talked about enough in venture.
And obviously, there are metrics like that. For example, if we have the VR apps, like how many downloads, how many users. But is there also some metrics that might be interesting to venture in terms of, example, we work with Pico, right, very closely on the enterprise side. And there's a lot of metrics that they are able to share with us about how many schools are, and Meta as well, like how many schools are onboarding the devices like into their environments. Like what are we seeing there? Because it starts to lay a pathway. It's not wholesale connected to us, but unless people have headsets, they're never going to get the content anyways. So I'd love to kind of hear, I guess, how you would assimilate that information, or whether it's just.
I think the market size like doesn't matter.
Okay.
Of course there needs to be some users that can adopt, but like okay, if there's more users in 2 years, that's a nice to have, versus like how people will adopt your product is what really matters.
Okay.
And like I'm not sure if there's a connection with you to Meta and that's why you're pushing the VR. That's also something that VCs will ask if you highlight that you've gone through like their support program. That okay, then that's why you're pushing the VR. That's also a bit like, okay, if you don't have enough market reason to go after VR versus your partnership with Meta is what's pushing you. So I've seen that a lot with like location-based gaming, where Niantic has accelerated some startups, and then the startups go outside of Niantic accelerator and they attempt to raise, and it's super difficult because the VCs outside of the bubble, like air quotes, that they're kind of like more thinking about realistic scenarios of what makes sense and what doesn't. Meta has its own agenda.
And it's funny because I mean we are in some ways like platform agnostic. I mean we build on Unity, right? So usually a couple of gaming engines that you use, 2 big ones. And funny enough, Meta's they came across what we were doing. We actually don't have any releases on Meta at all. Like we build with Pico and obviously connected to the ByteDance team. That's strategic because at the moment they're great to develop on. They move things forward fast and they are very keen on content across lots of markets. And I would keep our eye on what's happening in the Chinese market, because the Asian market for this type of product is incredibly interesting. So we have Chinese releases as well. But I think this point, like you want to tread that line, but you don't want to put people off, because some people have views of, where are you putting your eggs in which basket, and again, probably being a lot clearer in terms of nobody really pushes back if you build on Unity. I don't think. Maybe you could tell me, with your expertise, they don't mind that because they appreciate it can go in lots of different ways. And it's usually not at risk of, what happens if Unity closes up shop tomorrow? It's unlikely, I would say, but I think keeping an open mind as to perhaps what we communicate, whom we communicate it to, and then how we can leverage where we do have partnerships, to help it make sense to the venture world, right?
Yeah, like that. I think this is very interesting in a way, like if you can work on the deck to highlight the business, like where you gotten so far, what you're gonna do in the next 12 to 18 months in a more clear. You had the roadmap, but it didn't really point out that this is our goal.
Yeah.
Like number wise, how many students, things like that. That's
Yeah.
I think more beneficial.
Amazing.
But hey, Melissa, this was good. A lot of interesting
Honestly,
stuff.
you have to approach these things as an opportunity to like grow, because I think any founder at this stage who thinks they know, they don't.
Yeah, exactly.
I think that's the better. There's like a philosophy. I think it's Buddhism. I think my dad used to say, or maybe it's actually Star Wars. You know, those who think they know don't know, and you have to be willing to put it out there. And like probably saw me writing, you know, so many notes away, because actually it is early, and I love that it's early, but it means that we have time to take on board this great feedback. And thank you for your time to founders.
Yeah, of course.
Structure it. Yeah.
Of course. Yeah. Best of luck with the business.
Thank you.
Like, let me know how things are going. Like, send me messages. And
but if you've got a headset, you can get it on Pico. You know, a lot of the releases are out there, so
that's
you can try them yourself. Yeah.
Yeah, will do. All right. Take care.
Thank you so much. Okay.
Likewise.
Bye.
Bye.